Hello, I'm Dr. Jay Wimhurst, postdoctoral scientist at the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center. In this video, I'll be discussing an important component of the international climate policy landscape, the environmental treaty known as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC. In December 2015, the world was electrified as 196 nations gathered in Paris, France, for the 21st yearly session of the Conference of Parties to the UNFCCC. The conference took place 2 weeks after a series of terrorist attacks hit the city centre, and many representatives came to Paris with solidarity and resolve in their hearts. Inspired, the conference representatives negotiated the Paris Agreement, a consensus document that aims to hold global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius and encourages countries to pursue efforts to even further limit the rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But this landmark agreement wasn't reached overnight. The history of the UNFCCC goes back to 1990, when the Second World Climate Conference issued a call to the United Nations General Assembly for a global treaty on climate change. It took 15 months for an intergovernmental committee to conduct these negotiations, and the convention was opened for signature at the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. Only after another 2 years did the requisite 50 countries finally ratify the treaty, meaning the annual Conference of Parties sessions didn't kick off until 1995 in Berlin, Germany. Much of the first few years of sessions were taken up with the logistics of setting up a framework for implementation. It wasn't until the third Conference of Parties in Kyoto, Japan, that a commitment was crafted to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. Representatives trying to implement the Kyoto Protocol struggled to define exactly what dangerous interference looks like. Such a definition involved value judgments that varied widely across the globe. The agreement also placed the obligation to reduce emissions on developed countries, these countries having made the greatest contribution to increase greenhouse gas concentrations. As a result, the Kyoto Protocol was slow to gain signatories, and it did not enter into force until 2005. In fact, the United States Congress overwhelmingly rejected the agreement. As such, the United States never even ratified the protocol. The UNFCCC grappled in subsequent Conference of Parties sessions to define national commitments and create a global framework for reducing emissions. It wasn't until the 2009 Copenhagen Accord in Denmark that a quantified reduction objective was agreed upon. Global warming should be limited to below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. In the years between Copenhagen and Paris, the UNFCCC Conference of Parties sessions began global initiatives, such as the Green Climate Fund and the Programme on Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. As of September 2024, only Iran, Libya, and Yemen have not formally approved the Paris Agreement. Although the United States withdrew from the agreement in November 2020, it re-entered just a few months later. Much work has been accomplished since the 21st Conference of Parties in Paris in 2015. Rules have been established for how countries should report their emissions and for a global carbon market. Through a landmark decision at the 27th Conference of Parties in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, nations agreed to create the so-called Loss and Damage Fund to support vulnerable countries and communities already experiencing the adverse impacts of climate change. A year later, in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, it was agreed that this fund would be housed by the World Bank and had commitments totaling over $600 million equivalent. Dubai's Conference of Parties also marked the conclusion of the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, slated to occur every 5 years. This global stocktake assessed collective progress toward the long-term goals. The report clearly showed that progress is too slow, and that governments need to do more to prevent global average temperatures rising by 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Countries responded with a decision on how to accelerate action by 2030, including a call on governments to speed the transition away from fossil fuels. Nations also agreed to a transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. However, the alliance of small island states, many of whom already face the impacts of sea level rise, clarified that without language to formally phase out fossil fuels, the deal left too many loopholes. As you can see, international negotiations move slowly. Critics of the 2015 Paris Agreement have voiced frustration that the document lacks binding enforcement mechanisms such as fiscal penalties or taxes. However, the agreement has already sparked many countries, regions, cities, and companies to establish carbon neutrality targets of their own. The representatives from the UNFCCC Conference of Parties have committed to continue to meet annually and evolve this environmental treaty into the future by establishing progressive national achievements that add up over time to a worldwide goal.